My name's cool. Yeah, my name's Bucket, Manyweather. I actually attend UNLV,
Hmm.
getting my PhD in higher education. I work full time at our Black Unity Center here on campus at San Francisco State University. Been here for about 5 years and
Okay.
started out with the EDD, wanted something a little bit more philosophical, theoretical, found
Hmm.
transferred my units, and it all kind of just worked out with the pandemic.
That's great. I have a former mentee who actually taught my first semester teaching at Stan State, who helped to transfer to UNLV.
Okay.
Yes, a young Black woman. And unfortunately, Stan State is extreme. Well, the whole CSU, but Stan State in particular, is extremely, extremely anti-Black. And
I'm a product of the CSU.
oh, so and it's a Jim Crow segregation 2.0, in my opinion, because it's a public university, so it's what happened right during the original Jim Crow segregation, because everybody's tax dollars go to supporting the system. But it definitely is really underserving Black students. So I'm like, but Black California's tax dollars are helping to fund this. So it's yeah, it's not okay. But
Right.
yeah.
So I've been able to do these interviews in like a 2 hour block versus like two 60-minute sessions. So if you have time today to do maybe like the whole thing,
Mhm.
or we can also break it up into two sessions. It's kind of just totally up to you.
I do have time. I have a meeting at 11, but
Okay.
yeah, so if there's any additional time that's needed, because I know we're getting started a little late, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I think we should be fine on time.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we'll start then. So a little bit about this project is I'm looking at AB 1460,
Hmm.
mandatory ethnic studies in the CSU system.
Yes.
Um, Yay.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'm looking at this whole thing from an organizational sort of lens. Oh, am I also recording?
I am. I know that this is my personal Zoom room meeting. Oh, oh, that's cool. I didn't know you could do that.
Me neither.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So the theories that I'm using to try to understand all of this is actually so I'm looking at distributed leadership, so how leaders lead in the sort of horizontal way, and that's evident in this implementation. Also mixed with racialized organizations, because
Mhm.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Victor Ray's theory, but it's this idea that organizations, especially schools, are not race neutral and the
Yeah.
practices and procedures.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm combining those two theories to understand
Okay.
this implementation.
Yes.
And so yeah, I'll just be asking you some questions
Okay.
in terms of that. And I think ideally, sort of like as a side project too, I'd like to put together like a documentary about the
Mm.
implementation of ethnic studies,
Oh, I think this is
sort of
great.
like situated within like the 55-year struggle for ethnic studies.
Yes.
Kind of
Yes.
like my pet project, but it's all
Ooh.
connected.
Now, where are you from? California originally? Did you grow up here?
I'm originally from Los Angeles, California,
Okay.
Carson, if you know the little areas.
Yeah, I've heard of Carson.
Okay, yeah, originally there. I went to school at CSU East Bay, so a little bit
Okay.
more black
Yep. Hmm.
than most of the other CSUs. So I kind of lucked up on that. Studied black. Well, I started out as a computer engineering student. Didn't really know math like that because I went
Hmm.
to city school. I took a worldview of Malcolm X class, and I was like, all right, I'm changing my major to Black Studies. So I did. I got my master's at USF and higher education student affairs, got a job here.
Okay.
Yeah, I had worked around in the CSU, UC, and community college a little bit before then as well, just to kind of get a taste of everything in California.
Hmm.
Settled here, and kind of just been here. And I recently got into this position as the interim director of our Black Community Center. So
Okay.
a little bit about me. I think that goes into our first question.
Okay.
On interviewee history. So there's also like different sort of sections within this interview. So
Mhm.
first part is about your history. So can you please tell me a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are today, like professionally, personally,
Mhm.
whatever you'd like to share.
Sure. So my name is Mary Roaf, and it's so interesting. My parents met at Michigan State back in the 50s, and ultimately my dad ended up going to Washington, D.C., where my mother's parents and sisters would ultimately live as when they grew up. But my dad went to Howard University's dental school, and I was actually born probably one of the last batch of babies that was born at what used to be a Freedom Hospital at Howard University's campus, that then ultimately became the communications building. So I like to say HBCUs are just like literally, I mean, in my blood, because I was born on one. And when I was 6 months old, I have an older sister who's 5 years older, and my sister, me, and my parents moved back to my father's hometown of Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So there are a lot of pine trees, and I guess there are some bluffs or whatever. So it's called Pine Bluff, and it's 40 minutes away from Little Rock and Central High School. Of the 1957 desegregation, forced desegregation, Governor Faubus fame in Arkansas, who was resisting desegregating of the public schools in Arkansas. So I grew up there, and it is the Deep South. A lot of people, at least once I left Arkansas, were confused about, is it the Midwest? It's like, no, it's the Deep South.
Hmm.
And my father was a sharecropper, and he attended all Jim Crow segregated schools. So this had a really tremendous effect on me, as well as my family having historians in it. Like my grandfather on my mother's side used to collect all kinds of historic kind of artifacts, including some of the Jim Crow signs from the Jim Crow era. Um, he collected ancient coins. I mean, he had some really, really, really ancient coins. I think one ostensibly dating back to the Roman Empire. He also, I remember as a child one time seeing like a shackle that he said was like a shackle from the era of chattel slavery in the US. And he had a lot of other items in his collection, and ultimately was invited by the Smithsonian, one of the Smithsonian museums in Washington, D.C., to contribute part of his collection. And so my mother was also, both of my parents were avid readers. My mother became a lawyer. Her name is Andre with two E's, Rove, or Layton. It's her maiden name, Layton. She became a lawyer and ultimately was the first Black woman appointed to the Arkansas Supreme Court. And so was a voracious researcher. I mean, to this day, and this was before the internet and before Google. I still don't know anyone who surpasses her research skills. And so I had a lot of historians in my family and avid readers. And I mean, at 12 years old, I remember going to my parents' library looking for books to read out of curiosity. And they had a book called The Slave Narratives that was published as a result of interviews that were conducted during the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and doing all of those public works art projects. And so individuals who had been enslaved and were still alive in the 1930s during the Depression were interviewed. And it was really interesting for me to read their firsthand experiences, and to see how even I think some of the essays, the language was phonetic and just to kind of see how they, spoke. Of course, what ended up becoming African American vernacular English. And I also remember my parents having these kind of essays written by Thomas Jefferson. And it just really stands out to me. And I remember reading and it was really the first time I had just seen some of the underlying ideology behind anti-Blackness that I grew up experiencing. I mean, systematically, in the school system, with friends. I mean, to me, the Deep South in the U.S., at least, is ground zero for the racial dynamics in this country, and I don't think they can really understand what anti-Blackness. I mean, I think, the kind of roots of it, unless they've spent a significant amount of time living in the Deep South. And of course, I grew up there. So I remember reading an essay where Thomas Jefferson made this completely kind of fallacious, irrational argument that Black people were animalistic because we didn't blush. And this is what one of the essays said. And because we didn't blush, it meant that we didn't have human emotions. And so that meant that we were closer to animals. So these were just like and this, of course, I became really interested in history. I didn't realize that what I was reading was primary source, right, material. So to this day, I still integrate that into my classes. And ultimately, I really wanted to get out of the Deep South, and I used education as my kind of way out. And I thought out of high school I wanted to become a diplomat. And so I did some research on the different colleges and universities that offered that kind of education. And of course, I found out that Georgetown University did. And so I ultimately finished my undergrad at Georgetown with a BA in international relations with an emphasis in non-Western history, and in the School of Foreign Service. And Georgetown was very, very proud to let us know that the U.S. Foreign Service was named after its School of Foreign Service. And one of the requirements for graduation with a degree in international relations was to pass a proficiency exam from Hell in a language other than English.
Huh.
It wasn't just, oh, we're just going to have conversation, right, in the language. You have to, after 4 years or more of intensive study of the political, economic, and kind of cultural, social history of whatever the region was, it was like you had to answer these questions in that language. And this was higher level, like academic language. And you had to draw from literally centuries and centuries of knowledge to be able to answer whatever the question was in that language. And so I ended up choosing Spanish because I had taken Spanish in high school. And I ended up being an exchange student in Quito, Ecuador, before I graduated, because that was a recommendation, obviously, in the School of Foreign Service. They wanted us to have the experience traveling to a country or a region where the language was spoken. But I ultimately ended up, after I graduated, joining Teach for America back in 1993 during its first 5 years of inception. So before it became kind of the juggernaut it once, I think it probably peaked in the first decade of the 2000s. I was just I was actually had a LinkedIn invitation from March, because I don't check my LinkedIn account that often, asking me to interview for a position as for Teach World, which is the international expansion of Teach for America. And I do wonder how it's kind of what the reception or the perception of Teach for America is now that we have such a dire teacher shortage in the US. But ultimately, I ended up teaching in Washington, D.C., and then doing a variety of kind of youth outreach programs, which I started doing over the summers when I was teaching. And I decided that I wanted to become someone who at some point would be able to influence and shape K through 12 public schooling on a national level, because I immediately started connecting the dots with the inequities of like the neighbor that were impacting the neighborhood and the school where I taught in Washington, D.C. It was severely under-resourced. I mean, severely. This was 1993. We didn't even have a Xerox machine in the school that we could access. I think the principal may have had one in the front office, but the teachers could not use it. And I remember there was a mimeograph. I don't know if you're the old school machine. I had not known they existed, where it's got the duplicate copies, and it's like this, I don't know what to call it. You have to manually create the copies, and you get all of this ink on your hands. So I would go to the Teach for America office to make copies, and I wasn't making that much money, but it's very true. I think it always has been that K through 12 teachers pay out of pocket a lot for just basic supplies. So I got bit by the public policy bug, and then I was doing a variety of different kinds of work supporting primarily, because I started teaching 7th grade, so primarily middle school and high school aged students and young adults. And so I decided that I wanted to go to grad school because I wanted to integrate theory with all of this praxis, right? And so ultimately, I wanted to do a really deep dive in terms of my research. So I did end up choosing anthropology of all social cultural anthropology, but anthropology and education. So that's a subfield or sub emphasis of social cultural anthropology that's really applies a lot of the tools, and it's also, I would say, within that is because looking at inequities in public schooling in the US, it's also a branch of anthropology that is called North American anthropology, but is really that was created in the 60s by a number of anthropologists in the US and Canada, and that is still viewed as not really legitimate because it's not the original colonialist discipline of we're going to go around the world and study these other Black and brown people. It's like, no, we're going to take these tools and we're going to critically position ourselves to study a range of institutions, right, and norms within our own communities, within our own societies. So I fell in love with that, and I continued still planning to basically be a K through 12 education policymaker. And I hadn't initially set out to pursue a PhD because I was completely committed to K through 12 still. And so I was not planning to become a full-time academic ever, right? And I ended up deciding, because I started teaching in Washington, D.C., to go back to more of an urban context. So I had found an applied anthropology master's degree program in Arizona in Flagstaff. And I decided, I want to keep going. And so I ended up finishing up my doctorate at Temple with, critical anthropology of policy, applied anthropology, urban education, urban policy, like very, very, very applied. And ultimately, when I decided to go back into the K through 12 classroom, because I also got into teacher coaching, teacher preparation. So I've trained 200 K through 12 teachers. The landscape had changed so much from when I started in 1993, which I had learned through my research with looking at the privatization of public schooling vis-a-vis charter schools legislation and policies. I was at a crossroads because, of course, I started teaching before No Child Left Behind, but before high stakes standardized testing, all of that. And when I walked away from K through 12 after being a teacher in a first year of founding charter school and being a founding administrator in a second charter school in my hometown, I got the opportunity to become a faculty member at my former kind of master's degree institution in Arizona. And that's how I got into higher education. I left after 3 years because, of course, as a Black woman, I started out as a 1-year instructor and then ultimately became a lecturer. And one of my colleagues that I met there ultimately ended up being brought into California State University at Stanislaus to really resurrect their ethnic studies program from the ashes. From the ashes. I mean, this was in 2016. The ethnic studies faculty had resigned as a group mid-academic year because of the really just this core dilemma and conundrum of ethnic studies is always in a position of being embattled and being under siege within the academy, which is an absolute plantation, absolutely a plantation. And the question to me is, how do you institutionalize a radical liberatory movement? Obviously, with the recommendations, the tenets, a la the Black Panther Party 10-point platform. But like, how do we ever do that? How do we ever, I don't know if infiltrate or even these institutions that are so incredibly at the core are so corrupt, right? Are so corrupt with white supremacy, with heteropatri, all of the things, ridiculous elitism. And it's not just the roots and the foundation, it's like throughout the lymph nodes of the system. And so he invited me in after I went to Phoenix for 3 years to really get into education policy, work for a nonprofit. This colleague of mine invited me to apply for the Black Studies position once a tenure line position was created at Stan State. I did. I went through the process and I was selected, and I moved out here in 2018. And of course, just a couple of years after I got started, I would be thrust into the middle of just a brew of politics and a lot of drama around AB 1460 as it was making its way through the California state legislature. So got through that. It's still a fight. It's I have absolutely been in a war zone, quite frankly.
Mhm.
I am an associate professor. I was awarded early tenure. I mean, I earned it many times over. Thank you. In with the CSU, I mean, it's actually on our campus in particular, there's a problem with way too many, a much too high percentage of faculty being awarded early tenure. And of course, I love to study organizational structure and processes because policies, how they're implemented, the degree of transparency or lack thereof of how the system works, because that's what really gets weaponized. We've got so many different layers of obviously really alarming white supremacy and authoritarianism, but like when we peel all of those back, the way that all of our institutions are set up is just that's where the real abuse of power is happening. And I believe in studying up. A lot of anthropology. Oh, we're gonna no. I study up. So I get into these organizations, I get into these institutions, and I love an org chart. I love to see what's the policy, because and that's some of that my real interest with kind of bureaucratic and legal frameworks, because like Sister Audrey says, we can't tear down the master's house with the master's tools, but like I say, I can whip the master's ass with his tools, and that's what I do.
That part.
And it's made me such a target. And so I am going into my second year as interim chair, which should not be happening. The autonomy of the entire ethnic studies faculty has been hijacked, for example, because the dean of my college absolutely does not want, I mean, he's just does not want me to be elected regular chair. And I'm still here, and I was like, I'm gonna keep clearing clearing that rainbow road, just clearing it of the obstacles with a lot of assistance from this dimension and the others, and I'm not fighting anymore. I'm not fight. So it's like, I believe that we did inherit a legacy with ethnic studies that's really important in so many ways. And unfortunately, I believe that as a field, we also inherited just the violence and being under siege and the constant fighting. And resistance, to me, I'm really rethinking, what does that look like for me? It doesn't look like fighting. It doesn't look like grinding and hustling. It looks like reclaiming balance. It looks like collaborating, obviously fostering relationships with the larger community outside of the campus, as well as with like-minded individuals who have some integrity, who actually care about the students. It means reclaiming balance in my own life. And it means being very strategic and intentional, and knowing when a small L leads to a bigger win. I mean, Georgetown was very expensive, and I can't imagine what it costs now. And the way that I funded my education was through a naval ROTC scholarship. So I ended up not, teaching instead, but and I actually, it's a long story, but I actually went to military school right out of high school, even though I had gotten accepted to Georgetown. So I got a little bit diverted, but so I understand, right? I have a lot of military training and has never done, served at active duty. So I really kind of bring all of that to bear in this work, and especially as a Black woman doing this work. I mean, it's just learning that even my most critical folks, who were like community organizers, queer, but they're not Black. They don't get it. I mean, I'm just seeing beyond a certain point, you know, like my friend who's Latinx, queer man, and grew up in Santa Barbara, and like beyond, it's like, dude, do you know that the way you're stepping to me right now is like, it's just a certain, you can't teach it, you can't study it, you can't theorize about it, you can't, it's just beyond a certain point, they just don't get it. And so I understand that. I understand my positioning, and it doesn't mean that I do not value the relationships and the work that we do together. It's just California. I mean, I was on the East Coast for 15 years. I grew up in the Deep South. It's a different kind of breed of Black people out here. And to me, this whole state is very anti-Black. It may not have always been, but it definitely is to me. So, I have, you know, ways of doing the work, and I really do like living out here, but it's challenging in terms of the anti-Blackness and the way that it plays out in really interesting ways, subtle ways. So this is I'm starting my 7th year. And my relation to AB 1460, and of course, Shirley Weber, who also, her home state is Arkansas, but she had to leave surreptitiously in the middle of the night when she was a very young child. I joined our campus academic senate very intentionally as AB 1460 was making its way through the California legislature, and that was in 2020. So I have been at the forefront of navigating and leading and fighting for the implementation, not just of AB 1460 on our campus, as not only as an ethnic studies faculty member, but as the senator for ethnic studies, 3 years and counting. And it got really ugly. So I know that was a lot.
Yeah, that was the right amount. Cool. So let's dive into like some of these things you kind of just touched on and overview. Thank you so much for your life history and just, you know, really providing that context. So kind of shifting gears a little bit into campus history. So what is the history of ethnic studies on your campus?
Oh, this is so funny. And I know about this because the dean thought he was bad-mouthing the department to two of our finalists in a tenure track search last year, but ethnic studies was not implemented at Stan State until 1972. And Stan State is located in Turlock, which is in the heart of like the Central Valley. So there's there is actually, the Central Valley is notorious for really intense white supremacy. I've done research on it. There's also quite a bit of organized white supremacy. The founder of what used to be Identity Europa, I think was a student, was attending Stan State when he founded it. And I'm convinced that he had faculty mentors because there's just off the chart stuff. So for anyone who even is from other parts of California, and especially major hubs like Los Angeles or the Bay, and even though Turlock is very actually close to the Bay, it's a lot more like where I grew up than it is like other parts of California. So it's so interesting that people from California, a lot of them have never heard of it. And they experience pretty severe culture shock
Mhm.
And I was helping because my colleague, when he lived here for the first couple of years, he's like, oh my God, I'm going crazy. And there are Trump flags. And every time he was describing it, I'm like, you're in the cut. You're in the California cut. Like, it sounds more like where I grew up than the Bay. So it's like I've joined and connected with Black folks in the community, and they talk about even in 2000 there used to be Ku Klux Klan parades in Modesto, right where I live, which is like the largest city in Stanislaus County, and it's 20 minutes away from Turlock. But ethnic studies was established at the university in 1972. And what I did not realize is it was because of student protests at Stan State. And this is really, really, really hidden knowledge. It's not common knowledge at all on our campus. The dean, who's been there forever, he's just, I call them colonizer cracker crypt keepers. Because at home, we didn't call them white people, we call them crackers. If they subscribe, right, to anti-Blackness. So it solved a mystery because the building where the ethnic studies office and a lot of other kind of social science offices are located is called Bazzini. And it's like the oldest building on the campus. It's not, that hasn't been redone. And was always so interesting to me about it is that it's 2 stories, but the stairs are on the exterior of the building. There's no stairs on the interior. And apparently, I guess the dean said that the stairs were on the exterior of the building. So I don't know when it was constructed or rehabbed because of all he called the students rioting to bring ethnic studies to the campus. So they didn't want them to be able to go back and forth up and down the stairs. You have to actually leave the building to go up and down stairs. There's no interior elevators. Whenever I go to an institution, I do think it with a lawyer's mind, and I think about, there's a lot of lawsuits. There have been students on the verge of a lot of class action lawsuits. I mean, I'm in the midst of a major grievance, a whistleblower grievance where, part of me is like, I would just like to Nicole Hannah-Jones's place, sue them, become independently wealthy, but that's not, I'm here to do my, primarily for the students, and for the region. So I'm not going to do that. But even the elevators are not located. There's no elevators on the interior.
Wow.
So it was established there in 1972. And apparently, it was a program. It was in perennial kind of program, and the difference between a program and a full-blown department. There were very few faculty, and as we know, people will call anything ethnic studies. But if you don't have, at a minimum, ethnic studies faculty, you can be obviously for interdisciplinary scholars, but with an emphasis in Black studies, Asian American studies, US-based Native American, not indigenous. These Latinx folks almost completely pushed out actual US Native American-based scholars. We got one of them, not indigenous, Mexican American from East LA, Conquistador Karen, going from Miss Indigenous to calling herself Native American. I'm like, you are not Native American. You are not. You're Mestizaje, and baby Africa is up in that mix too, but y'all don't erase that. We're not going to talk about that. But anyway, I digress.
He's hot.
I digress. So, without the 4 food groups, Native American, Black studies, Asian American studies, Latinx studies, it's not even truly an ethnic studies department. But it was a program for all of this time, systematically under resource based on the kind of formula that's used to calculate faculty salaries, the base salary, all of that. There's all these ways that the institution has very intentionally and covertly marginalized ethnic studies. And there were so few faculty that, I come from K through 12, so there was no real cohesive ethnic studies major or minor. It was just basically whatever the expertise of the faculty was, and then they had to outsource a lot of the classes to other faculty because the capacity was never there. It was just never there. And during the economic recession of 2008, and then coming out of that, what has happened out in California is that students have continued to engage in striking for ethnic studies, like the hunger strikes at Berkeley in 1999. Well, there was a version of that happened after the recession because there was a kind of a lot of reconfiguring of smaller programs like women and gender studies. And the dean, who was still there at the time, thought he was going to cut back or really severely cut ethnic studies. And the students, again, protested that. So even though the Central Valley, in Stan State in particular, the students are not known for being activists, but what I've learned is there's a tradition of student activism that dates back at least to the students fomenting to bring ethnic studies to Stan State. And ultimately, he started being rightly characterized as very anti-ethnic studies. So he wanted to kind of change his public image. And so he brought in, my colleague who I had met when I was a faculty member at Arizona. And that was in 2016. And it was it's been an upward struggle ever since for every and anything. What really shifted our positioning at Stan State was that because of AB 1460, because of the new graduation requirement, the first one in more than 40 years in the CSU, and the faculty and the courses needed to teach all incoming students at least one ethnic studies class, we are now a department. And we gained formalized department status right at the end of, I was interim chair for 22, 23. So at the end of the 2022, by the summer of 2022. So we're going into our second year as a department. And the only reason that happened is because of AB 1460. And what I will say is there was also funding that was allocated by the state to implement it. And to this day, I have gone to the dean, I have gone to the provost. They refuse to say how much the funding was. So we don't know. I mean, I know what the dean is like. We also added 2 new tenure track lines. Well, really 3. So we have 2 ethnic studies faculty with an emphasis in Latinx studies. Because of the population we know in the CSU and at Stan State is largely Latinx. My colleague did bring in this person who's a complete fraud. I mean, unfortunately, ethnic studies has to deal with the issues from within and without. He chose this person because of our population, and he first wanted to choose a scholar who had more of an emphasis in indigenous, but not to the exclusion of US-based Native. But that's, we finally, we have 2 Native American Indigenous Studies lines. So we finally have someone who actually does US-based Native studies. We have a second Black Studies faculty member. We cannot keep, it's been very hard to retain someone in Asian American study with the emphasis in Asian American studies. So we're working on that. But we've definitely grown exponentially. And we now have our own full-time department coordinator, who actually is an alumni of when my colleague came in those first, from 2016, I would say, to 2020. I mean, worked tremendously hard to completely revamp the ethnic studies curriculum, to actually make it have a scope and sequence for the majors and minors that makes sense instead of being hodgepodge and all over the place. Unfortunately, in higher ed, scholars and PhDs don't learn how to teach. They don't learn curricular design. And I mean, this stuff is not easy at all. They don't know how to do it. So it's a hot mess for the most part. And people don't update and revamp. So all of that, we've done all of that in our department.
Awesome. Okay, shifting gears a little bit more, so to policy implications. So who are the formal and informal leaders of this implementation on your campus? If these leaders were to leave, how sustainable are these changes?
So the formal and informal leaders on the campus for this are me and Samuel Bañales. Period. Now, obviously, there's a host of the dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, the Academic Senate, including the University Education Policy Committee that is responsible for all of our general education, right? And because the chancellor did force there to be a new area created to try to really silo and ghettoize ethnic studies. We really pushed against that, and I worked very, very hard to come up, because we still, after AB 1460, there was the law, then the chancellor of the CSU and the academic overall senate of the CSU always opposed it, always opposed ethnic studies as a graduation requirement. I mean, that's why Shirley Weber, who's now the California Secretary of State, she was, I believe, a Pan-African faculty member in the CSU for 40 years, and knew, after decades of trying, knew that, as we call them, the white masses and misses of the plantation that is the CSU were never, and the majority of the white faculty and white supremacists, regardless of whether they're white or not, they were completely set against having ethnic studies as a graduation requirement. So after AB 1460 was signed into law by Governor Newsom in 2020, then the hard work of implementing it at the campus level and interpreting it at the campus level happened. And the chancellor's statute with Area F, and that was really where the sticking point was. And there was a lot of confusion. The chancellor's office wanted the changes to happen very, very quickly. What the statute called for contradicted some of what was in the law. And this was done very intentionally to create a lot of resistance at the campus level. And especially because what AB 1460 did, and what Shirley Weber was brilliant about doing, was not just the ethnic studies as a graduation requirement, crafting the language, and the chancellor tried to come up with this bogus, watered down, version as a Hail Mary pass to try to get the governor and the California legislature from passing the law. But again, the timing of it, I really don't know that AB 1460 would have been voted into law if it had not been for the summer of the murder, kind of the knee on the neck that was heard and felt around the world, the murder of George Floyd, and the explosion of Black Lives Matter on a global scale. Of course, that's like the story of ethnic studies itself, but with the larger context of what was happening with social justice, not just in the US, but around the world, when the Third World Liberation Front strike happened, but what became very apparent to me as the senator who had been trying to navigate and foster and cultivate support among the faculty on Stan State, because Shirley Weber proposed another bill prior to AB 1460 as a result of an ethnic studies task force that was created by this 2 chancellors ago, Timothy White, and that bill got shot down. So she went back to the drawing board, and then she crafted AB 1460, and that one ultimately made it through. The Stan State campuses at any time, the 23 campuses, any of them could have passed ethnic studies as a graduation requirement internally, because each one has an academic senate. And that was what came out of the ethnic studies task force that Timothy White had assembled. And the number one suggestion of that task force, this was back, I don't know if it was what, 2015 to the what, but I wasn't there yet. But because the finding of the task force was that the CSU should create an ethnic studies graduation requirement, he just basically, in policy terms, in implementation terms, passed the buck to the 23 individual campus academic senates. And what they did is, for all intents and purposes, they completely reneged their faculty governance because they just didn't do anything. They had years to act on it. So I say all of that to say is that what Shirley Weber also did in that bill is that it set up a more hierarchical implementation process where ethnic studies or ethnic studies equivalent faculty would lead the implementation of ethnic studies on throughout the system. And it included the implementation, which gets into governance, right? This gets into faculty governance. So it was set up in a way where it was ethnic studies faculty, it was representatives from faculty governance, but it didn't specifically say, and then it was another, I forget what the third group was, but what it did omit was it was like administration was nowhere in that governance kind of process that was specifically delineated in AB 1460. And what this did was it created an opening for the faculty on my camp, and not just Stan State, others, it created a power struggle, because the way that curricular decisions are made is through the UEPC, the University Education Policy Committee. But they were not specifically cited in AB 1460. It just said representation from faculty governance. So it was upending, right? Which makes sense, because if you have this law, but then when it gets down to but you don't address implementation, and you don't create a different process that doesn't go through the conventional governance channels of UEPC, they're gonna completely subvert the implementation, right? They're gonna so I was part of an informal AB 1460 working group, and we decided collaboratively, our whole approach, myself and Samuel Banyales, this was 2020 to 2021, our whole approach was we're going to be collaborative on our campus. We're going to actually bring in faculty affairs. We're going to bring in the provost. We're going to bring in the Speaker of the Senate. We're going to bring in student voices. I think that student voices. And we're going to lead the implementation, and we're going to take our time doing it and not be rushed. And so we formed an informal what we called an AB 1460 working committee, that because we had Senate being represented, they were like, let's formalize this. We'll propose a resolution for Senate to vote this into becoming the AB 1460 implementation ad hoc committee. See, all of these dynamics of faculty governance, and of course, there's power is really concentrated in the academic senate. And I will say it is the heart of darkness on our campus. We got shady administration on one side and we got shady faculty deeply entrenched on the other. And everybody gets caught in the crossfire. Students, other faculty, right? Even some administration. So everything was going really wonderfully well until it became time to pass a resolution in Senate at the end of 2021 in terms of what would it actually look like on our campus. And even though Senate representation was deeply involved in the AB 1460 ad hoc committee, the University Education Policy Committee leadership wasn't. Mm-hmm. So they tried everything to take over control, to block it, to muster faculty opposition so that the majority of senators would not support the resolution that we came up with in the committee, and that because I was a senator and I was working very closely with the Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker-elect of the Senate to get it all crafted and ready to go. Ultimately, it just ended up being very complicated. I won't get into that right now unless you want to get more into those dynamics. But because I've been, as a Black woman by myself in these institutions for years, like I said, I learned how to study their tools, and they ended up painting themselves into a corner. I saw it. Other people who've been at it a lot longer than me didn't see it because they're not Black and they're not women. And they played themselves right into a corner, and we passed the resolution that we wanted to pass. We passed the resolution that we wanted to pass. Now, what's happening now is just the dean really trying to control the department as a whole in any way possible. So he's been, but we are growing by leaps and bounds. And the larger issue right now is that this coworker, I won't call her a colleague, is incredibly corrupt. She was brought in at the same time I was, and it goes back to that original energy of ethnic studies. I will just say that she's very corrupt and she's very corrosive. And she's really, really undermining the work of what we're doing. And it's been hard to acknowledge the reality that she's got to go. But ethnic studies gets attacked from within and without. And unfortunately, it's a part of ethnic studies being within, the academy. I don't know that there are many ethnic studies programs or departments that are doing the work beyond name only. I don't know that there are at this point. We are, and it's a constant fight to do it.
Thank you. Can I answer that already? I mean, if you want to get more into it, I have a question. Question 5, how did your campus implement mandatory ethnic studies?
Okay. I don't know. The key component we knew had to happen was, again, it was a shift in the governance structure of curriculum and approval of courses and placement of courses, is that AB 1460 was very clear that ultimately it is ethnic studies faculty that are charged with leading the implementation of ethnic studies courses. And the core challenge around that was that the University Education Policy Committee saw that as a direct usurping of their power, and they wanted it to go through them. And what we got was, now obviously we're not going to create a whole separate like AB 1460 committee. And what it means is that ethnic studies, everything goes through us first before, like, we house AB 1460. Ours are the only courses, right? It has to be the ETHS suffix cross-listing. You know, there's a lot of people, like, the way that ethnic studies gets devalued and anyone thinks that they can teach it, they don't value it. I don't think they ever will as a valid, rigorous academic discipline or course of study and scholarship. They don't have to, because we, through the resolution that was it's collaborative. So ethnic studies on our campus is solely responsible for implementing AB 1460. Now, the ethnic studies courses, the ones that are in Area F, I mean, I'm doing that work right now of reconfiguring what courses are going to go in Area F. We also want ethnic studies distributed across other areas.
Those are my next questions.
It's not ghettoized. Once we do that, it goes through UEPC. Right? We're not talking about fully changing the faculty governance structure and process. And when it comes to ethnic studies courses, with the ones that ultimately will even be considered for approval, they all go through the ethnic studies department. UEPC doesn't get to decide that. They don't know. They don't have the expertise. And we've decided not to create a whole nother committee. It's like, no, we're it. Ethnic studies is AB 1460 on our campus.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. You kind of touched on it briefly. But number 6 is, how was the curriculum decided? If at some point all ethnic studies courses were not automatically considered for Area F, why is that?
So number one, we didn't want to have all, which is like, that's what the Senate on our campus wanted. And that was the intent of the chancellor throwing in that Area F, which like threw off other areas in other, for GE, it threw off the 120 unit, right, graduation requirement. There's just like all kinds of moving parts. AB 1460 never called for the creation of Area F. That was the chancellor's office that did that.
2 separate things.
Yeah. Right. This is how they weaponize the system. They don't ever have to bring out a Proud Boy sign. They don't ever, I mean, it's the ultimate white robe. Right. They can just cover up, hide behind the system and the processes and the bureaucracy and policies. And I went in and they were really, my mother, just growing up with lawyers and judges, I really started going in about AB 1460 versus the chancellor statute, for example, because what the chancellor inherently throwing together that statute, they were like, well, we have to, anyway, the chancellor's office did not delineate an implementation process in that statute, but AB 1460 did. So what I argued in the Senate meeting was the actual implementation within AB 1460 takes precedence because the Chancery statute doesn't even delineate that. So there you go. They were like, oh, oh, oh. What I have found is these folks, a lot of people, their PhDs are not worth the paper it's printed on because they cannot critically think their way out of a paper bag. So I'll just say that. The number one reason we did not want to have all of the ethnic studies courses placed in this area F that comes from the former chancellor at that time. At the time, it was between Timothy White and, of course, Joseph Castro came in with his white self. These people. He's white. The people don't understand Latinidad, but anyway, it's some conquistador Kens and Karens up in there. I'm gonna just say that. Who get to play and skip all over, say they're indigenous one day, they're Latinx the next day, and then but get to be living in their full white privilege, white supremacist, white adjacent selves. I've
been in the CSU since Joseph Castro, that's not even his original last name. He changed his last name.
Sound just like the conquistador Karen. Now, her mama named her after Diana Ross. She went and changed her name to Guaponca Sochi.
Okay.
Everyone thinks that's her. I was like, that's not her government name. She bought it and changed it. Like I bought this hair in my braids, but
Perpetrator. Perpetrator.
Ooh. So anyway, we were very clear about that. Oh, these faculty were hot. These white folks were hot because what I have seen about faculty governance and I know that there's layers to this, but a lot of them, they rely on the courses that they teach being required. So students then are corralled into them. And I've had facilitated many discussions with this, about this with my students. And students become a captive audience. So instead of them actually caring about their craft, caring about the students, and there are many faculty who do your job, support the students, teach in an engaging manner, and then you always have students. Why is it that ever since I've come to the campus with a very small and ever dwindling number of Black students, my Black studies classes are always filled? It's not rocket science. So the second reason why we did not place all of our ethnic studies courses in the area F category was that we don't have the capacity with our faculty yet to do that, to actually be able to teach if we were to place all of our classes in the area F category. Number 3, because Samuel Banyales completely revamped the entire ethnic studies scope and sequence of the curriculum, so that now what we have is a really substantial course of a curriculum for our ethnic studies majors and minors. We also know what courses make the most sense to place in area F based on the design, right? How is AB 1460 going to play out? It's going to play out with all incoming freshmen and transfer students. So we primarily want to focus on lower division classes and what lower division classes make, and which lower division class makes the most sense in terms of not just the letter of AB 1460, but the true intent behind it. Well, it's going to be the Intro to Ethnic Studies course, right? It's going to be that one, to introduce students to the field as a whole. And then to provide So we have a lot of, and also the intro to the different emphases in the field. So the intro to ethnic studies, intro to Black studies, intro to Asian American studies, intro to, I'm going to call it Native American studies. Indigenous wasn't added on until later, just like Pan-African, that expansion wasn't added on till later. Rightfully so, if it's being done in a way that is true to those right emphases. And then of course the Latinx, intro to Latinx, Chicanx studies. And we do keep going back to the drawing board. So what I'm doing now is in the process. I didn't do it last year because it was overwhelming to be interim chair last year. Someone was on sabbatical, but also it was our first year as a department. So there was just a lot going on. What we're in the process of doing now, because this is a dynamic process, is we're getting the upper division. We want to add a number of upper division classes that are the kind of part B classes to all of those intro classes, so that students have options to actually be able to wait. And if they want to take the class that's going to fulfill the ethnic studies graduation requirement, they're not confined to doing that in their first couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And this notion of, oh, well, the upper division courses can be counted for the requirement, even though, again, it was the chancellor's statute that said it has to be lower division. Mm-hmm. The law didn't say that. It's like, no, we're going to give them a range of options so that they will have lower division and upper division classes in area F to choose from. Now, in terms of our curriculum, it had already been revamped. What Samuel did when he came in was literally, he redid like 30 classes.
Wow.
I mean, it was beyond. I would not have done, but so the timing of when AB 1460 passed and all of the work that he had done, and then that I had done, and we had done with the coworker, I mean, legitimately the first couple of years when she was there. Like, I remember my first year at Stan State, we would have 4, 5, 6 hour ethnic studies program meetings. I mean, we were grinding. So for our campus, because of the internal vision and drive, our campus is in an excellent position because of the work that we were already doing. So that's why we're like, we have really great momentum, except we have the internal, except it's always a fight. And you would think, I mean, there's no, oh, God forbid that they would be like, oh, thank you. And it's like, no, we're keeping y'all in good shape. We're making sure that you are compliant with the law. Mm-hmm. But that's not how we're being treated.
So my next question is, what are some points of ease in implementing Area F? You kind of mentioned the revamping a little bit. Mm-hmm. So would you like to add on to that, or kind of just keep it as that?
I would say the points of ease are the law itself. I mean, that was explained repeatedly. I remember even when we came back last year, is that it's the law. Mm-hmm. There's nothing you can do about it. I mean, faculty were still trying to talk about it as if they were able, I didn't want to weigh in. It's like, oh no, it's the law. So the ease is that it's taken out, regardless of, it's deflated, the white lash. There's just nothing they can do. Mm-hmm. If you don't like it, go somewhere else, teach somewhere else, go outside of the CSU. Why don't you go to Florida? Why don't you go there and teach? If you don't like it, why don't you go to Texas? But if you're going to teach in the CSU, this is, and they're not even teaching it. They still, how you going to hate from outside the club? You can't even get in.
I've also kind of connected with that ease, even with my dissertation. People want to argue about the law, and I'm like, well, that's not my focus.
Yeah, it's a done deal now.
Yeah, so let me study it.
Exactly. So, the real ease and magic for me is what this actually means in practice. And the reality really started sinking in for me actually this semester. Like every single student now has to take an ethnic studies class. Now, I will say that we have been very concerned about, especially out here in the Central Valley, the cracker chirises, okay, the ones who are not, but the ones who are so indoctrinated into white supremacy, to the degree where I know I grew up in, there are parts all over the country still where the white children have never seen a Black person before. I mean, that still happens. Mm-hmm. I just encountered that anyway when I was in Sonora, and the little white boy almost fell off his bike. I'm like, So we've been so focused on that resistance, but here's the thing: the majority of the students are still students of color. Mm-hmm. And all of the white students are not indoctrinated, right? They have not drunk that Kool-Aid. So we have been bracing ourselves for, it's a double-edged sword, because before AB 1460, students were selecting. So it was, to a certain degree, it was like there was a degree of receptivity, of openness, and we're like, oh my God, what's going to happen with these kind of, what I did not think about was before, it took some time for the Black students to know that I was on campus. And once they did, they started enrolling in my class. But a lot of them were not able to, just because, for a variety of reasons. But, and as Black people, we don't largely major or even minor in ethnic studies, even though we're starting to get more. This semester, it really hit me because even though the Black student population at Stan State has declined by half in 6 years, from 4% to 2%, every single Black student is also going to have to take an ethnic studies class. And what I have always wanted to do is connect with and teach and advise and support the Black students on the campus. I mean, I've done that in a variety of ways. And now the ease of it is, of course, a lot of the Black students are going to sign up for the Black studies classes. Mm-hmm. It's me, and it's another faculty member who is wonderful. He's our Pan-Africanist, originally from Ethiopia. And it's like, it's really hitting me. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have to do all of this additional work, even right, to connect with the Black students because of AB 1460. They're coming to me. They're coming to me. And I will say that it's opened up a lot of opportunities in unanticipated ways. Like I have been working with the K through 12 districts in the region, because now, of course, there's a high school ethnic studies graduation requirement. I do consultancy with DEI, but with organizations, and I'm starting in with my second one, which is a new children's museum that's opening up in Modesto, where I live. I'm continuing to work with Modesto City Schools on their ethnic studies task force. They're very serious, and I worked with them on their kind of implementation committee to really workshop and be very intentional about what is ethnic studies going to look like for the high school graduation requirement. just finished a Fulbright into South Africa. That was a specialized Fulbright that like tailored for K through 12 and CSU educators and administrators, and that in order to really get us up to speed to be able to implement. I mean, it really integrated ethnic studies in a really interesting way. So there's a lot of ease in terms of all of these other parts of my work that I didn't even realize
Love
would be
that.
the case. Yeah, until we actually started putting AB 1460 into practice.
Cool. What about that one? How has the policy fostered growth within the units?
Oh, wow. I mean, literally, we are offering exponentially more sections of courses than ever before. So, and all of our courses are filling up or waitlisted. So, at a time when the CSU is being faced with declining enrollment, when literally, for example, Stan State has this year to hit, because our enrollment overall had declined last year. The numbers kind of vary, but it was definitely between the 3.3 to $4 million deficit just in student tuition and fees because of the declining enrollment. And Stan State does a really poor job, I'm sure, a really poor job, right? And I mean, I've been beating this drum for years since I came here, and now it's a concern because of the money, right? So that was last year. And we learned at the end of the spring that Stan State has this year, 2023, 2024, to hit enrollment targets. And if it doesn't, then the state is going to cut the budget allocated to Stan State and this is all the individual CSUs. And so the two funding streams that support the CSU is taxpayer dollars and student tuition and fees. So I'm like, oh, wow, if we don't hit that target, we already suffered a loss in tuition and fees. So then there's going to be an additional loss with the state funding, and the CSU may strike because somehow the administrators and they always find just a bottomless, bag of money to give themselves pay increases to the direct detriment of increasing student tuition and fees, of still severely undercompensating lecturers, and really of undercompensating faculty. So what's really interesting is courses have been cut before, right, during the Great Recession. Other programs and departments have been impacted. And AB 1460 really buffers ethnic studies against that. It's going to be a good question to me. For me is like, how many units have increased just exponentially. An exponential increase in the units that we teach. Also, what's happening is it's not impacting just the kind of area F courses. We always knew that if students get introduced to, the earlier or the sooner students get introduced to ethnic studies, the likelier they are to major or minor in it. And that is also happening. So now we're having to offer, instead of say offering a methods course every other semester, it's more so, we need to offer like 3 methods courses each semester so that our majors and our minors are able to progress through the scope and sequence of their concentration, right? Their focus, without having to spend extra time and money on staying in school longer because something is not offered, So it's definitely having a domino effect in terms of increasing our units across the board. Now, the downside of that is we always have to make, having all of these courses covered. So it's a lot of work for the chair, because it means lecturers, it means when the tenure and tenure line faculty get course releases or go on sabbatical, the stakes are higher because it's now also about compliance.
Okay, shifting gears more into resources. So what kind of faculty are teaching these courses? How are they selected?
That's a great question. So we do have a rigorous selection process. It's one that, again, someone Banyale's really helped to fine tune, and because we were conducting so many interviews, so faculty, tenure track faculty are selected based on the job descriptions that we create within the department, primarily led by the chair, and but also everything is discussed. So we have biweekly department meetings. I'm actually going to be going through a job description to get yet another tenure track search for ethnic studies with an emphasis in Asian American studies. It's really interesting with Asian American studies, and and even having Asian Americanness on our campus, but they're not in ethnic studies because they're not really ethnic studies. I'll just put it like that. Positioning matters. It's very hard to, anyway. Model minority, recent yellow peril based anti-Asian hate notwithstanding. So we go through a process, obviously, that's required by the CSU, and we very much tailor it to our program, our vision for really a comparative, critical, intersectional ethnic studies that, right, it's not so much about the siloed approach. It's not so much about simply providing courses that only look at how different marginalized groups relate to white supremacy, but look at, right, how they relate to one another, especially in nuanced and, I would say, somewhat contradictory ways. If we look at like Native American studies and the longstanding history of co-solidarity between US-based Native Americans, right, descendants of African chattel slavery, but also looking at the absolutely unequivocal white supremacy enacted by like the 5 civilized tribes, or, the Black codes instituted after the Civil War. I mean, these are in places like Virginia, where my family comes from, where it's the anti-Blackness, the systematic expunging of people of mixed African-American and Native descent, and having not just based on blood quantum, but based on who gets to stay on the rolls historically, right? Knowing that Native women who got with Black men were literally excommunicated from the tribes, but you could get with white folks. And so the reality is, part of the reason why there's so many pretendians who are white adjacent is because they are largely white. Because of the right, it's real complex. I mean, we get into all of that complexity. And again, it's the groups in relation to one another and not simply or solely or primarily in relation to white supremacy and whiteness. So we obviously, we create our departmental tenure track committee. Search committee. It's been really hard because up until recently, only one of the ethnic studies faculty members had earned tenure. Now there are 3 of us with tenure, but one of them is the very problematic. They're just ops. They had COINTELPRO all up in the social justice movements.
Mhm.
That's still happening. She just straight up COINTELPRO.
Mhm.
Up in ethnic studies, stealing money, child. Conquistador Karen. I'm like, child, she's out Karening the original Karens.
Colonizer's gonna colonize.
They gonna colonize. So it's all kinds of, and I was like trying to figure out all kinds of ways. I said, no, that's why I just like, okay, what's the policy? Okay, okay, now we're gonna let whatever it is. I'm like, if I gotta deal with her, I'll deal with her. She's scared of me. She don't want to deal with me anyway. But so we go through the channels that are laid out by the CSU. We create our committee. We can also have outside members. It's very important with lecturers and with tenure track searches that the education, the training, the teaching experience, it actually shows a robust grounding in ethnic studies, and as well as in the area of emphasis. I mean, we take into consideration a lot of transferability. Like, even if ethnic studies is interdisciplinary by necessity, because there's not a whole lot of PhDs in ethnic studies. So where are you going to find the faculty? So we do even look at what were the emphases in the dissertation. And firsthand experience in teaching ethnic studies at the secondary or post-secondary level, we create interview questions very intentionally that are tailored to the vision of our department and to the needs of our students and our campus and our region. And we do interviews with lecturers too. It's obviously more intensive with tenure track searches. So we do the preliminary interviews via Zoom. And then over COVID, we were doing searches because we were getting approved even before the passage of AB 1460, faculty lines, more so replacement ones. But before COVID, we were able to do in-person interviews, and there is a big difference. I would say the critical difference is we really need to be able to bring candidates to the campus. So last year we conducted the first in-person tenure track search since COVID had started. And that was really, really important. It's a lot of work, but it's really important for anyone who's going to teach ethnic studies in our department at Stan State. This is a really challenging region. It's a challenging campus, and I'm for ethnic studies. And I know there are different reasons, there are challenges across the board, but and it's hard to retain faculty of color on our campus as a whole. So to bring someone to do ethnic studies, it's really challenging. So we definitely prioritize I would say in-person, interviews. But our process, I mean, there's a required process that's laid out, and we tailor it. We tailor it for our needs. But the key thing is that not only do the candidates for lecturing or for tenure track position need to have that background, and preferably not only in terms of education, in terms of community-based work. That's a huge part of it. In terms of also their teaching, but they cannot be the conventional run-of-the-mill academic. It's tricky. And I think the best way of saying this, because I mean, this is the academy, that's what it produces. And I'm just going to say it as someone from a K through 12 background, I didn't know that systems like the CSU existed.
Mhm.
I thought that because I've always largely served, like in K through 12, overwhelmingly students of color with primarily Black, Latinx, Asian students, schools that were largely Title I, or where 90+% of the students qualified for free and reduced price lunch, but also I just didn't think that I would be able to find a higher education institution that was made up primarily of the kinds of students that I served in K through 12 outside of community college or an HBCU. And the CSU is that. Like, I didn't know. So for people who are kind of mainly in the R1 mode, we're looking for an opposite kind of scholars. We're looking for opposite kinds of scholars. We're not looking for the conventional publisher perish. Scholarship is important. Research is important. I mean, I'm publishing more than I ever thought I would because I'm doing it based on feeling very passionate about contributing to really critical literature and bodies of work. I mean, I'm doing all kinds of guest lectures, conference presentations at this point internationally. I don't think, but it's right. It's not coming from the R1 mindset. It's coming from the holistic, very critical, and it's not just coming from abstraction in theory. It's coming from my actual lived experiences. Right? So what we're looking for is really what we look for. Who we look for is unconventional, just unconventional scholars, unconventional educators, where it's not just about actually their training and their scholarship, and it's about their souls. And it's hard to find that. It doesn't matter what the institution is, what the sector is. We've been able to do pretty well with it. It's really been difficult to retain an Asian Americanist. I will say that.
Thank you. We have about 15 minutes left and we're about halfway through the question.
Oh.
So I mean, I don't know. I mean, the next question is kind of a big question. So, I do have another meeting after this as well at 11. Yeah. You have a meeting. So you want to just maybe like pick this back up?
Yeah, let's pick it back up.
Okay, cool. I can also come out to you. We can Zoom again if that's easiest.
I mean, it would be great. I think if you could come out and even, we could even meet on the campus.
Okay.
And I can show you actually, yeah.
I want to see that building with the stairs outside.
And actually walk up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And no elevator on the inside, which in the elevator not working. I mean, I had a student who was differently abled and wheelchair bound, and the elevator would just not work on a breakdown. And one time she got stuck. It's just, yeah, it's some.
I'd love to even come and do like just like brief, like student questioning and stuff.
Yeah, and I think actually our coordinator, who is actually a graduate of the revamped ethnic studies program, who's now our department coordinator, they would be really amazing to talk to.
Okay.
Mhm. You know, I don't know if you would even want to combine like a class observation in with that. I teach in person on Tuesdays, but it doesn't have to be that. But
Well, I'd love to just, maybe not even observe, but just come to your class because it sounds like it'd be awesome to sit in your class.
yeah, just like to sit in.
Yeah.
So any Tuesday, my Black Studies class is the first one, and the Intro to Ethnic Studies is it's freshmen, it's their babies. It's so I've got to just like I love my Black Studies class. Oh my gosh, yeah.
So if I come on a Tuesday, would I be able to like interview you that day, or will we have to do that like another time?
I would say you can interview me that day as long as I don't have a Senate meeting. So Senate is every other Tuesday from 2
Okay.
to 4, and it's on Zoom. But
Okay.
like for example, on the 12th, I'm going to be checking in on Zoom with a couple of faculty, but like September 26th, for example, is totally open after my class. So I teach from 11 to 1:45. I teach 2 classes back to back, and then I'm done. And what I've been doing is going to my office and just like, you know, working until 4 or 5.
Okay.
So the next time that I have that gap of time open, it's going to be on September 26th.
Okay. Sounds good. I can do that. And I can come to a class, sit in on the 26th, and whenever you can fit me, I'll walk around. Can't
Yeah, we can walk around after class is done. And the biggest thing is just like you just get there's like a kiosk where you can park. It's like, once we get closer, sending you a map of the campus. The easiest thing is going to be to like meet in front of the library.
Okay.
You could actually just type in the one in front of the library, because our building is located really close to that. Um, so you could either park off campus, even though it's hard to find parking. They oversell, parking slots, but there are kiosks where you can get a daily parking pass. They used to cost $6. I don't know if they still do, or if you can just like park somewhere off the campus that's close to it. That's what I did like my first year before, when I first started, and I didn't have a parking pass.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, and I might just take a little chance because I think if you pay for parking, like mine just comes out of my salary. Like I think it's
right.
in campus, and if it's not, I'll just say I thought it was.
They don't play. They will ticket you so fast on this campus. They get so much. I had students do some research on that. We do
Really?
plans of action. I mean, they're generating significant profit from parking. This was before COVID.
Okay, I'll just buy the pass.
I'm just saying, yeah, I would not. I wish, but
Okay.
I wouldn't risk it.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Well, I'll plan to drive out, take some time off, and drive out there for the 26th. I'll try to get some permission too and see if I can fly my drone, get some shots.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And cool. I look forward to continuing this interview. This has been
Same here.
good, and I love hearing from you.
Thank you. Thank you. But I'm so excited that you're doing this research. I'm like, of course. Like, I mean, and it's still happening, right, in real time. So I knew as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, this is, and especially as a history buff and major, and I was like, as an historian, I mean, I'm a social scientist, I'm an historian, I'm Miss Teacher Lady all day, every day. But like, oh my God, I was like, and I'm like, we are a part of history.
Yeah.
We really, and it's when you're in it, I know for me, I've been so immersed in it that I forget that sometimes.
Right, that's
Like,
why it's a challenge. This is
yeah,
literal history, and it's been fun to study too, because I've been like really studying this in my PhD since 2020. So like really when it's passed, and it's just like just to see it unfold and become a reality in such a short amount of time is kind of wild.
it's wild, isn't it? It's wild. It is happening very quickly. And I understand my assignment. And it's like Nanny McPhee, which it's like when they need me, that they don't want me, I am staying. When they want me and they don't need me, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe then it'll be time for me to go.
Hear that.
We'll see.
All right, Dr. Rowe. Well, thank you.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.
Bye bye.